that the SNP will be returned as the largest party in 2016.
Oh, they are touch wood for that. There was an interesting point I noticed this week. I wanted to get your takes on this, which was around this leaflet which emerged from Labour in Dunfermline, which cited a range of sort of policies, including kind of major gains of devolution, as we might think of them. Free prescriptions, freeze of the council tax. What other ones am I trying to think of? Free tuition fees at university, etc., etc. That on all these areas that were, for a period anyway, a year or two ago, by Joanne Lamont, appearing to be threatened with review. Suddenly, Cara Hilton and her functionaries were arguing that Labour was in favour of them, and were implying at least that they remained in favour of them, which I thought was a remarkable development insofar as it suggests that Labour, in terms of its ideology and its policies for Holyrood in 2016, are just all at sea, are totally lost. And with the best will in the world, I can't make out what the hell their argument is beyond we agree with the SNP. And that went so well in 2011. Peter, I don't know if you spotted that aspect of the campaign, but what do you think of that in terms of Labour's policy to get back into power? Have we seen the emergence of a credible argument yet?
I don't think we have yet. I thought Jamie's piece on New Statesman this week was bang on the money. I think you can read too much into this result, and I think there's been possibly a bit too much been read into it already in terms of Labour's. Who was it that said it? I think it was John Cassidy in the New Yorker that you need to lose 3 elections in a row before you actually really figure out what's wrong with you. And if you look at his point was, if you look at his point about the current Republicans, where the Republicans have lost 2 presidential elections in a row in the States and are in complete disarray and look quite likely to lose a third. And he was counterposing that with Labour in the 80s in Britain. And whatever you want to say about what came out of Labour, they did change what they were thinking and they did get elected. Whatever about what policies they did, how they did that and what came afterwards. But it feels a little bit like Scottish Labour are in that kind of malaise. It feels like they're halfway. They're not at the end. It doesn't look like at the end of this cycle where they can say, we know what we're about. It feels like they're still halfway through it and they're kind of making it up as they go along. And I don't think anything really. It was very hard to say what Scottish Labour stand for still. I couldn't. If you were to name what does Scottish Labour stand for in a line, I couldn't tell you.
Because they no longer even stand for jailing people who are likely to stab your granny. I mean,
no, they've kind of given up that. The kind of it's a strange kind of wishy-washy centrism almost with bits of kind of. They've gone off the hard law and order, which stood them in such good stead in 2011.
that was the famous McTurnan influence. So Jono advised the Scottish Labour Party to play the law and order card in 2011. The Labour Party will suffer a horrendous defeat. Then he'll jet off to Australia, ruin Julia Gillard's career. Then he'll come back and be given a column in the Scotsman and the Daily Telegraph. It's a pretty cosy number, actually, being an ex-Blair advisor.
I have a friend who's a journalist for a national newspaper, and he was at the 2011 halfway through try and turn the ship from the Labour Party, where Ian Gray gave that famously incoherent statement, and he said it was the worst by far and away. All the hacks just looking at themselves, watching a car crash. It was by far and away the worst kind of party statement, party gathering he'd ever seen in coming up to an election. And I still think that's in them. I don't think Dunfermline changes much, really, does it?
No, there was a fair amount of sleight of hand in those flyers as well. Like when they talked about bridge tolls, for example, they had a big picture of the Forth Bridge, whereas they opposed the scrapping of tolls on the Forth Bridge. Although they did scrap, I believe, the tolls on the Erskine Bridge. And there was lots of this kind of stuff where it was. You know, people have talked about how Labour and SNP, sometimes in certain ways their policies are quite similar. But all of you, I think, said that Labour sometimes don't seem to have a policy. They do have a policy. It's just oppose anything the SNP does, even if it was something we sort of agreed with before. So, like, things they might have proposed and then the SNP took forward, they then opposed them when they were in opposition again. That's still the mantra. And I don't know if you saw the absolutely appalling attempt at humour they did with another kind of Photoshop job. Did you see it? How Labour will destroy you and your family from the Labour Party. Did you see this? Anyone?
No.
Okay, I'll explain it because I'll put it on the web page with the thing because it's okay. Money. SNP will give you some. Labour will spend it all on povos. I find this quite worrying, this use of language. But this was a Labour thing.
Is that a phrase? Is it povos, meaning what?
Yeah, double meaning poor people.
Povo. That's not even. I mean, who's ever even fucking heard of that?
I thought it meant point of view. God, I've been sitting in a wonky hellhole for far too long.
Yeah, SNP will grant you eternal life. Labour will condemn you to hell. Clip art. Seriously, it's not great. You're not kidding. It's quite an appalling attempt at humour. It shows a distinct lack of irony, even though they're trying it. But yeah, that's their policy. Oppose anything the SNP does. That's it. That's what they're interested in. Nothing else.
Here's the thing. Cara Hilton has to now vote against any attempts by her party to condemn in the Scottish Parliament. She has to vote with the Scottish Government essentially on free tuition, on bus passes, and on the whole range of universal benefits that Joanne Lamont now says are up for debate. And if not, her credibility with the Dunfermline electorate will be just shot to pieces.
Well, is there a suggestion here that potentially that whole escapade by Joanne Lamont, that critique of universal provision of services in a straitened financial circumstance, is that maybe died on its arse, effectively, in terms of internal Labour opposition? Because it's not come up again in a clear way. We have this recent by-election material, which presumably received sanction from somebody. Might it suggest that whole critique, which at least hinted at moving towards a coherent, if for some of us politically objectionable message, has essentially been dumped? And so what we have is nothing again from the Labour Party, with the best will in the world in trying to understand what they would do differently if they were in power in Holyrood. What do you think, Peter?
Because I was just thinking it'd be interesting to have a Labour activist on here to give their point. I would agree with you. I don't hear as much of that rhetoric for them but at the same time it's slightly more difficult as well, because they're juggling between taking the lead from Westminster and are taking the lead from Glasgow probably. But I think that's part of their problem. But I think at the moment, as I say, I think you would struggle to say what does the Labour Party stand for. I think that's going to be a real problem when it comes to a Holyrood election, because the Holyrood electorate have shown themselves quite sophisticated. Even if it's a no vote, or if it is a no vote next year, it's hard to see them punishing the SNP for a no vote in the way that the Labour Party seems to think they will do. If you even look at the Labour Party, Cara Hilton's statements about how this was the Dunfermline electorate rejecting independence and things like that, it's like, I don't think it is really. I think if Labour hadn't won that seat, it would have been a huge, huge deal. It would have actually been a national story, amazingly, out of an MSP by-election. So I think the least they could do was win the seat, which they did do. And I think that's kind of the long and the short of it. I think the Labour Party are still not much closer to figuring out what it is that they stand for and how they're going to go about doing it. I think only the parties, the kind of recent speech by Ed Miliband was the first time where people said, actually, we kind of feel like we might know what Ed Miliband stands for. So maybe that's part of it too, is that Labour in London have been fairly betwixt and between for a couple of years now. So there hasn't really been a steady point there. Maybe now they're going to start taking their lead more from Ed Miliband. Whether that's going to play that well up here, that's a different question, I guess, in terms of Holyrood elections.
Sorry, Peter, I think that's brilliantly damned with praise there. You listened to Ed Miliband speak directly to the camera for 20 minutes and you said, I think I might know what he stands for. That's quite...
Yeah, the reason I don't think Lamont is preparing to abandon her 2012 statements about universal benefits is precisely for the reason that Peter has just alluded to. Miliband is preparing to strip back universal provision in public services. Part of me thinks that Lamont was just getting in there early to avoid being accused by the SNP of just following Miliband's lead. So and also Labour has played the underfunded colleges universal free university education card very, very hard, and there's no way they could possibly change their position on that, not least because it's not an entirely unreasonable position. So I don't think that she's going to turn her back on her something for nothing speech, as politically inconvenient as it is for her.
And actually, I should say, I mean, I had a bit of a Barney earlier on this week about the energy freeze and whether it meets Joanne's terms. But I think there is an argument here about about resources and where we allocate them, and whether universality is always an appropriate tool for setting policy. And I don't think it is always appropriate. And when you do have limited resources, I would defend universality in some circumstances but not in others. I dare say actually many people in the Labour Party would argue something similar. The question is which circumstances, which policy areas you'd want to privilege universality over a bit more nuanced provision. But I think it's I wouldn't want to say that Joanne's argument was without any intellectual foundation or importance. It is a case, a take, if you like, on the policy problems that we have. Okay, so maybe on me giving myself the last word, privilege of the host, we can move on to, I suppose, what's been the much bigger political topic of this week, which has been the Grangemouth dispute with Ineos and Unite, and the terms and conditions of workers, the site's been closed happily, I suppose, for the 800 workers who were due to get the sack in the petrochemical plant in Grangemouth. They've been reprieved, it's all going to open, and the workers have accepted, I think, a pay freeze and pension terms which are rather less generous than they were before this particular conundrum. I don't have many thoughts on this topic myself because I'm not really very up on my industrial policy or my economic policy. But I wonder, Peter, I'll go to you first. What do you take away from the kind of Grangemouth dispute and its outcomes?
I must confess, I am similarly, when it comes to energy policy and things like that, I am similarly lost. I think it's been interesting because everyone's taken there's been two readings of it in terms of the press, which is, one is that the Salmon and Swinney kind of rode into the rescue and showed and I think Martin Kettle in the Guardian kind of almost made that point, that by kind of coming in, by helping to effectively save the plant and do a deal and being the public face of it, they kind of showed what consummate politicians they are and how Scotland could stand on its own 2 feet, etc., etc. And the other side of it, which the line other people took, was that it demonstrated how precarious Scotland's position is in global flux, etc., etc., reliant on energy, on industries like petrochemicals that are changing quickly, the limits of North Sea oil, things like that. I don't know. I think it feels like a lot of people played a bad hand here. It feels like the unions were led into something that the management wanted them to do. I think the unions I do feel like the unions were kind of almost goaded into an action that management wanted them to take. It looks like Ineos are still going to walk away with quite a bit of cash from the government from this. So it feels like the biggest winners are probably Ineos, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Jamie, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think it was a desperately sad and depressing state of affairs. As I understand it, Grangemouth accounts for 8% of Scottish manufacturing output. Workers' pay accounts for 1.6% of the running costs of Grangemouth. Ratcliffe essentially runs Grangemouth on his own terms as a majority shareholder in Ineos. So he's just ransomed. He's ransomed Scotland to clamp down essentially on the unions. You see, it seemed like just a nakedly political manoeuvre, and he did what he needed to do or wanted to do with absolutely brutal efficiency. But it highlights the weakness of the state and of the unions in the face of these enormously powerful industrialists. So yeah, very sad, very depressing.
I mean, there's another point which I know that a number of people raised, which is the question of public ownership was being talked about by people kind of on the left. One thing, I think this is coming up quite a lot at the moment, we're talking about, when we're talking about companies that deliver public services, I suppose, and recently, of course, with the privatisation of the Royal Mail, there's another kind of frontier in this particular struggle. In company law in this country, directors have a fiduciary duty to pursue the profit motive. That's the goal. We shouldn't be surprised if they do so. The same is true about energy companies, for example, who put the prices up. That is understandable within their own logic and within their own professional life that they pursue the profit motive. It's bizarre to me that we would sort of think that these companies would not pursue those motives because it would be firstly in defiance of law for the directors to do so. Peter, I don't know, did you take anything in a sort of broader political analysis about what this might tell us about public ownership being an important thing and potentially, I suppose, the perils of privatisation?
I think there's something in that. I didn't think it was going to happen, but it would have been interesting if it had gone down the route of the SNP taking Grangemouth into public ownership. I think the SNP are definitely showing a more of a willingness to engage with that than I think anybody else would have done. And I think if you look at what happened with Prestwick, I think a lot of people in this country, especially in the UK, but even just in Scotland, don't actually realise that Prestwick is now